Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel, Tomcat Stitchery. I'm Whitney and I'm waiting for my business partner to join me. Come on. Oh, sorry, just poked her in the face. And we have week 2 of the B6543 sew along, which is our wrap dress. Today we are going to be assembling the bodice and getting that all ready. Changed up the pattern a little bit. I'm going to talk about that. We're going to cut everything out, do that first. And I think I've got some new camera angles figured out. So if the first part one made you seasick or gave you vertigo, hopefully this one has fixed that issue. I've spent a lot of time this week fixing those camera angles. So I hope you enjoy. As always, if you have any questions, leave them down below. And I will see you next week for doing the skirt, attaching them, and then we will finish it up. All right, I hope you guys have a wonderful Sunday, and I will see you next time. Bye. Okay, so here we have all of our pieces. So I'm going to go through them with you real quick. Here's our pattern. We are doing view A. And I'm going to talk about the changes that I've made to the pattern, hopefully in a better camera angle now. All right, so I am going off pattern quite a bit. Excuse the noise in the background. We are still under quarantine and my house has been overrun by my children. Okay, so this pile here is a whole bunch of bias tape that I have cut from the fabric, and this is 2-inch wide strips. I've not sewn them together yet, but I am going to sew them all together, and then I'm just going to press them in half because that's how I am going to attach them. So I'm not going to do that on camera. You guys can do that. I'm not really sure how much I'm going to need. I just cut a whole bunch of strips, but I cut, oh guys, I cut 2-inch wide strips. I'm going to connect them all into one long piece, and then I'm just going to fold them in half and press them in half like this. So they'll be 1 inch wide once they're pressed in half. All right, so that is how I'm going to finish the neck edge and then the whole skirt. So we're going to need a fair amount, but that's how I prefer to hem anything with a curved hem, which this has. All right, the tie piece. I just took this piece here, which is number 3, because I'm doing the ties differently. And I just set one of these on the fold of my fabric crosswise, and then just cut it the length of this. So basically 2 strips that are double this. I just butted one end up and cut them double. I did that on the wrap dress I did on the daily vlogs, and that seemed to be plenty long. So that's what I've got here, and I've got 2 of those. All right, then we've got our skirt pieces, and this is the front skirt, I believe. Yes, and like I showed you, I have widened it by, I think, 1.5 inches. I took 2 inches out in the lengthen and shorten line, but then I went back and also took another, guys, sorry, I really apologize for the sound. And also took 2 inches off the hem. So I cut 2 inches off from the bottom as well. So this has been shortened a total of 4 inches because I'm only 5'2". I've got the pocket pieces. I think I am going to put the pockets in only because these get sewn into the waist seam. So I think that'll keep that anchored. So there's 4 pocket pieces. And then there's the skirt back. I did the same. I didn't add width to the skirt back, but I did do 2 inches at the length and shorten line. And then I took 2 inches off the bottom of the hem as well. Then we have the sleeve piece here. You should have 2 sleeves, and this is where I've done my full bicep adjustment here. We did that on camera last week. And then I've got my bodice with my dart marked, and I did the full bust adjustment on there. And then I have my back piece that I have not touched. I've not done anything on there. Okay, so those are all of our pieces. So we are going to start off by first getting all this out of the way. Again, I'm going completely, I'm not going to follow the directions probably hardly at all. But here's our front pieces. And I've got my darts marked, or I should. Sometimes, yeah, there's my dart points. So I'm going to first go over to the machine and I am going to sew my darts in. And then I am going to attach my, I'm just gonna tell you what I'm doing, and then I'm gonna go do it and take you along with me. So I'm gonna sew my side darts. I am going to sew my back darts of my bodice, and then I'm going to sew my shoulder seams together. So I'm going to sew the front and the back together at the shoulder seams, but I'm not going to sew the sides shut. I'm going to put my sleeves in before that. But before we even do the sleeves, we are going to attach twill tape to the neck edge all the way from, you know, the bottom front of the wrap all the way around the back neck to the other side of the wrap, just to keep everything nice and stable. So again, I'm going to sew my front darts, I'm going to sew my back waist darts, attach my back and front at the shoulder seam, and then we will come back and I'll talk about the twill tape. All right, so we're ready to sew. So I've already gone ahead and sewn all of my bias tape together, and I have pressed it in half, as you can see. And just for reference, I have no idea how much I'm gonna need. I have about 12 yards of this. I just measured it. I don't know that I'll need that much, but that's how much I've made. And it didn't take that long. I just sewed all of my bias strips together and pressed them in half. So yeah, 12 yards of that, but we're gonna put this aside for now because this isn't gonna come until really one of the last steps. All right, so now I'm going to, like I mentioned, I'm gonna sew the bust darts on my front, the waist darts on my back, and then what I didn't mention, and then I'm gonna sew my back and my front together at the shoulder seams, 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, but I'm also gonna go ahead and sew my ties, and what I'm gonna do is, I'm just gonna sew them in half, right sides together, down the long edge. I'm gonna leave both the short ends free, because actually on my last wrap dress that I made in the daily vlog, I just tied that off when all was said and done, and I kind of liked the look of that, and it was easy. So I'm going to do that as well. I'm going to sew these in half, right sides together, and then I'm going to turn them right side out. I have a bodkin somewhere around my sewing room, and I cannot, or a loop turner, and I cannot find it to save my life, which is really unfortunate because this is the perfect time to use that. So back to the old safety pin it is. Okay, so now I've got my darts sewn on my front and my back. I've got a mess here. I have, there we go. Darts are sewn, and I've got my shoulder seams are sewn and serged, and I'm pressed them towards the back. But again, we've got open side seams here. So I'm going to take this over, back over to the cutting board, and I'm gonna show you how I cut my twill tape, and we're gonna stabilize the neckline before we go any further. Also, I have my ties done, and actually, I wanted to tell you a couple of things. If in doubt, make your ties super long. Again, I've used the piece that's in the pattern, but if you want to lengthen those, that's fine. I do like the width of that. And I sew these, when I'm sewing them right sides together, I sew them at 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch. And then when it turns, it almost turns into like a kind of a thick rouleau loop. Not really, because rouleau loops are cut on the bias and these were cut on the straight grain. But then I don't press anything. I just kind of leave them ropey. I kind of like that. So I've got my 2 ties already sewn and turned right side out. So I'm going to put these aside for now. We won't need these until the end of today. Okay, so let's go over to the cutting table, and I will show you how to do the twill tape onto the neckline. All right, so like I mentioned, we've got our bodice that's looking like this so far. It's always so confusing. And then, okay. So there's our back bodice. They are sewn together at the shoulder seams and at the shoulder seams only. So there's the front wrap on one side and the front wrap on the other side. Also, I'm loving this fabric. It's so beautiful. All right, so what I want to do is I've got here 1/4 inch, or actually, is this 1/4? Yeah, this is, yeah, 1/4 inch wide twill tape. And I'm going to sew this on the inside into the neckline of the wrap, just to help keep it from stretching out over time. Now, you could put a woven interfacing, not woven, like a non-knit one. Yeah, I guess a woven interfacing, or like a stay tape if you wanted to on the inside, that would be fine. But I really like the stability that twill tape gives me. So I'm actually going to sew this in. I want to finish this off with 3/8 of an inch instead of 5/8 of an inch, only because I feel like this is a very wide neck opening, and the hem, you know, it's just, you're just changing the hem. So instead of sewing this at 5/8, I want to sew this at 3/8 of an inch. So when I sew this in, and we're going to talk about the length to cut in just a second, but I'm going to actually sew this in to where, I'm actually going to sew this in at 1/4 inch because I want this to catch, but I want this side right here to line up right at a 3/8 inch seam line, so that when this does get folded over at the 3/8, so basically since this is 1/4 inch, it'll be sitting about 1/8 of an inch away, but I'm going to sew it at a 1/4, so I'll be sewing kind of right in the middle just to kind of baste it in place. But when I sew my 3/8, once I fold it over with the bias finishing, that will be nice and encased, and that will be right up against the edge there. I hope that makes sense. I'll talk more about that at the sewing machine, but that's kind of the idea. So the length that I cut for this, because now this is a cotton lawn, so it's a little more stable and doesn't stretch out quite as bad, but if you're using a rayon, holy moly, those things stretch out to, no matter how quickly you stay stitch them. And technically I probably should have stay stitched this, but I didn't. So what I want to do is I'm going to start, and hopefully I'm zoomed out enough that you can see this, at the bottom part of the pattern here. And I'm using my pattern because the pattern is going to be true. And I'm literally just going to walk my tape around, and I'm going to mark. See, you've got these handy markings here where the shoulders are. Let me move that bodice piece out of the way and the back piece. So I know that this is where my shoulder is. So when I have walked my tape along this line, and then I get up to this point here, sometimes on these curves, just walk it around. When I get to that size 14 shoulder, I'm going to mark with my Frixion pen. And then I will go from that point to the shoulder point here on the back, which is right there. Oops, wrong way around. I'm gonna keep on traveling. So there's that shoulder point there on the back, and then I'm gonna keep walking it around until I get to center back, and then I'm gonna mark that. And that is 1/2 of the way around our bodice. So then at this center mark, I'm just gonna fold that in half, and then fold that on itself, and then cut my tape there. And then at my shoulder mark, I'm just gonna match that up, and I can see my shoulder mark through there. So I'm gonna mark it on the other side. So now I have these center back basically and both shoulders marked on that piece of twill tape that I've cut. So now if I've had any distortion or any stretching out of that neck edge, I can kind of ease it back in as I'm sewing this in. So I hope that makes sense. So now I'm going to go back to the machine, and I'm actually going to sew it in, but kind of basting. I'm going to use a regular stitch length, but I'm going to sew this in onto the front, onto the bodice neckline. Okay, this camera angle I'm calling Adventures in Sewing, or Adventures in Filming, because I literally have a tripod in between my legs while I'm trying to sew this. So let's see what we can do. So now we are going to sew our twill tape. I hope my voice isn't like super loud because I'm really right behind the camera here. First we have to orientate ourselves All right, we're sewing this twill tape onto the wrong side of the neckline. We're going to start at one end. Okay, here we go. So this is, this right here is the front edge of the right side, I believe. But I've got it right sides up. And I have, again, I've marked my twill tape here at the shoulder line. So what we can do, I don't want to pin it all the way around because I like to ease as I'm sewing. But I am going to, let's see, again, I said that I'm going to sew this in. This is the wrong side up. It's kind of hard to tell on this fabric. But I'm going to line up this twill tape. So this twill tape's a 1/4 inch wide, and I'm going to make a 3/8 inch seam allowance on the neckline and the hem of this dress, just because that's what I want to do. And so, so even though it has 5/8 of an inch in it, I'm not too worried about that. It's just going to make the neckline not as wide, which I'd actually prefer. So I'm going to line this up to where the twill tape, this inside edge, is sitting right at that 3/8 of an inch. I'm not going to sew this first pass at 3/8 of an inch. 3/8 of an inch. I'm actually going to sew it at a 1/4 inch so that I catch the tape in that. But then when I go to apply the bias tape to finish off this edge, it will get sewn literally right next to the edge of this twill tape, so that when it's all folded in, the edge of that twill tape is right there on that outside edge, which is exactly what I want. It's going to be a beautiful finish. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I can go ahead before I start and match up my shoulder, which is right there. Okay, so I have my first notch that's right there. You also need to be careful. This twill tape's been on a roll for a really long time, and so it can get very twisty very easily. Doop, 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 doop. Okay, there we go. So I'm just going to pin that right there at that shoulder seam. And my shoulder seams are pressed back. Boop. And then I've got my center back marked, because I always do that when things get cut on the fold, and it is right there. There it is right there. And then I will mark my other shoulder seam, which is right there. I'm not really worrying about how close these are to the edge right now. I just want to get the points marked or pinned in, and then I can, you know, I'll be moving it around as I'm sewing. And then I'm going to see, this stuff even ties itself into a knot. Okay, then we're going to all the way down here to this other front edge. All right, let's start sewing. Hopefully this goes well. So again, I am lining up, I'm going to sew at a 1/4 of an inch. I'm also sewing through the viewfinder. God, this is just a recipe for disaster. And I need to make sure I get my foot on the pedal. Bear with me. Okay, I'm going to sew at a 1/4 of an inch. Seam allowance. That's not a 1/4. 1/4 of an inch from the raw edge of the fabric, which is just going to catch this tape. Come on now. But I want the far left-hand side of the tape to be at, there we go, at 3/8 of an inch. So I'm gonna line up my tape about 1/8 of an inch away from the cut edge. All right, I'm just gonna sew at a 1/4 of an inch all the way around. All right, that was interesting. So there we go. I just really want to get that stake tape. It does not have to be even in there. So then when we're sewing at our 3/8 of an inch, when we're putting our bias tape on, we will just sew right along the edge of that twill tape again, so that when everything gets flipped over, that right there should be right at the edge. Okay, so now our neck edge is nice and safe and sound. So let me move you back over to the end of the machine and we will talk about sleeves. All right, now that we have our neckline stabilized, and that will get finished off almost one of the last steps, we're gonna turn our bodice right sides out. It's kind of a mess here. And grab your 2 sleeve pieces, which I have here. I like to insert my sleeves flat when possible. Obviously, if I've got a jacket where I'm wanting to build in a lot of sleeve cap ease and that kind of thing, you want to do it in the round. But for most shirts, dresses, that kind of stuff, when possible, I like to insert in the round, or in the flat. Insert it flat. That was confusing, sorry. All right, so here is one armhole that I've got right here. This is the back, this is the front notch. And so I'm going to match up my correct sleeve, which is this one. So right sides together, I'm going to match. So here is the sleeve. You see the sleeve cap. This is the hem. So we're going to match the top of the sleeve cap to the shoulder. Now again, with a sleeve, you're, sewing a convex and a concave curve together. So it looks weird when you're pinning. And then I'm going to bring this over here and match my 2 back notches for the back part of my sleeve. Oops. And then my 2 front notches. I mean, 1 front notch, not 2. Matching my front notch over here. Okay, so now I'm going to go to the machine and I'm going to sew this at 5/8 of an inch, and I'm going to sew with the sleeve down. So I have the sleeve down because I'm going to use my fingers to ease in the sleeve cap ease. So let me get an anchoring stitch here. Okay, so once you've got it started, usually the first curve matches up pretty well, the curve of the bodice and the curve of the sleeve. So get to that first notch, whether it's back or front, depending on which sleeve you're sewing in. All right, and now here's where we deal with ease. And you guys have seen this before. And it might be easier if you're right in front of the camera again. I'm going to enter this as a sport and call this Olympic sewing. Gymnastic sewing? I don't know. So you'll notice this is my bodice and this is the sleeve. This is all the sleeve ease that we need to fit into here. So I've got my shoulder seam and the top of my sleeve pinned here. So I'm just going to grasp that. It's just out of frame, but I'm just way too close to the machine because my arms are short. So I'm going to grasp that in my right hand, and then my left hand, I'm actually going to come here in between the 2 pieces. And as I am sewing that, I'm going to very gently bring that in to match my raw edges. I mean, they don't have to be perfect, as best as possible. And we're just gonna go slow. This is so hard to do this way. And you just wanna make sure that you're barely bringing in, just to make try and avoid getting any puckers. Some squeeched out of there a little bit, that's okay. Take that pin out, because sometimes your pins can cause puckers. Okay, now on to the second part, to the front in this case. just going to go. Okay, and usually by the time you get to that notch, everything is kind of 1 to 1 again. All right, now we're gonna flip it over and see how we did. Oh, look at that, beautiful. Very impressed with myself. So see, we've got the ripplies, but no, which is what you want, the E's, but there's no puckers. So that is going to be beautiful when all is said and done. All right, now I'm gonna put you back at the end of the sewing machine while I sew the second sleeve end the same way. All right, so I've got both sleeves sewn in now. Everything looks good. So I'm gonna go over to the serger and I'm going to serge both sleeve or armhole seams really quick, and then I'll be right back. Okay, so then now that my arm's eyes have been serged, we're going to sew our side seams. So this is where I'm gonna sew from the bottom of the shirt up to the sleeve, armhole, underarm seam, and then to the hem of the sleeve. So I'm gonna start at the bottom of the bodice and go all the way up through the hem of the sleeve, and I'm gonna do that on both sides because I want the seam allowance, my arm size seam allowance, to go into the sleeve. So I want both of them facing towards the hem of the sleeve. And be careful sewing because your dart bulk will be in there and you don't want to accidentally get that all twisted up. Okay, once both of my side seams and up into my arm seams have been sewn, I'm just going to take this over to the serger, serge it real quick, and then I'm going to press these seam allowances towards the back of the bodice. Okay, so now my bodice, it looks like a bodice, a wrap bodice anyway. So I've got my seams are serged and pressed to the back, and then on the right side, so the right side when worn, I've taken a little piece of interfacing and fused it to the back. This is the back piece right behind this seam allowance because this is where I'm going to put my buttonhole. Now, this is thin fabric. You can kind of see it through the right side, but that's going to be underneath my arm, and it's barely visible. So my response to that is if anyone is looking that closely underneath your arm, they're too close because you do want that interfacing there for that buttonhole. It's really going to strengthen that. So, yeah. Okay, so the next step, and I'm gonna put you back in my lap again, is I'm gonna do a narrow hem on both sleeves, and I'm gonna show you up close how I do a narrow hem, and then we just need to attach the ties to the front, baste those in place, and then we'll be done for today. We'll be done with the bodice, and then next week we'll work on the skirt and put everything together. Okay, so let me put you back in my lap, and I'll show you how I do my narrow hems. Okay. If this doesn't convince you all of my undying love of you all, then I don't know what will. If you could see what I look like right now. Okay, so I have my blouse, or the bodice, right side out, as you can see, and I'm going to sew inside, so this is the sleeve hole opening. So I'm going to have the wrong side up, but I'm kind of sewing in the loop. It's just much easier to do. And I start at the underarm, and I am literally just going to, there's a little bit of fold over. I'm just going to fold this over, and I'm totally eyeing this, by about 1/4 of an inch. And I'm just going to sew kind of right in the middle of that seam. This does not get seen from the right side when all is said and done. Oops. Gosh darn it. Okay. So you're just turning a baby hem. Oh, sorry. There we go. And we're gonna sew all the way around, just like that. Sewing just kind of right in the middle of that little baby hem that you're folding under. You could also use a rolled hem foot. I've just never gotten good at those. I'm sure that's something you just, I mean, I know it is something you just really have to practice, but. So now we've gotten to the beginning. You can go back and trim, especially right here at the seams, just because things can get just a little bulky. Just trim that off. Okay, now we're gonna go around again. A lot of times you have to untwist your garment. And now it should fold really easily to the wrong side. And now I'm gonna be very careful to sew really close, well, as close as I can right now as I'm sewing at a handicap here, but you're gonna sew really close to the fold all the way around. You could totally use a edge stitch foot here. This is really hard to do because I'm not right above my presser foot right now. I think I'm really close to the edge. Yeah, I am. Okay, so there from the front, you've just got a nice little narrow hem and no pressing. I actually hate pressing. I mean, unless it's a big thick hem, I will press before I sew. Now I'll go and press now, but I hate pressing as I go, especially teeny tiny hems before I sew them. I find them much easier to do it this way before you press, and then press at the very end. So I'm gonna go sew the other sleeve, and then I will press both, and then I'll meet you back at the end of the machine again. Okay, for our final step today, so my sleeves are all nice and hemmed and pressed, we are going to attach, basically baste, our ties to the front of our top. Oops. So this is the bottom that's going to attach to the skirt. This is where our twill tape is attached here. So this is the front wrap part. So basically what you're going to do is you're going to take your one of the ends of your tie, and we're just going to baste it, and I'm going to baste it. So your pattern piece, hopefully you can see this, it comes down at an angle and then it kind of squares off right here. I'm going to sew this in right at that point where it squares off. So I'm putting this on the right side, bumping it up to the raw edge, and I'm bumping the top side here up right at the top where it goes straight, if that makes sense. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. You see the shape there? So the top part of this right here is just bumped up, so it's right at the top of that straight part. And I'm just going to baste it in place at 1/4 inch. So that's what it looks like, because when this gets, the bias binding gets attached and then everything gets turned beautifully, that will be like so. Okay, so I'm going to do that on both sides. And I'm also going to say that these ties are going to get super annoying between now and when you are finished with your dress, but unfortunately this is when they have to go in, so. Okay, so there we go. Both are basted, and so our bodices are now finished, except for the neckline's not been finished, but that gets finished with the hem of the skirt. That's the very last thing. So I'm going to take you over and show you what we've got, and then we'll be done for this week. All right, so there we go. there, this is what we've got so far today. Our bodice is done. Obviously needs to be attached to the skirt. So we've got raw edges here, but our twill tape is in, so that when that gets finished off, it's going to be a nice, lovely finish. Do that with bias binding. Our sleeves have been hemmed and they're in. Yeah, this is pretty simple. I don't have my hole yet, so I couldn't pass my ties through the wrap hole. We'll come up with a name. But the hole that the tie can pass through. So we'll do that at the very end. But yeah, she's looking good so far. I can't even tell you how much I love this fabric. This may be one of my top fabrics ever. I love it so much. It's just so pretty. Okay, so I am going to say goodbye for now. And next week we will make the skirt, attach our pockets, and then attach the skirt to the bodice and hem everything and be done. All right, see you next week.